Hello everyone, welcome back to the Crash MotoGP Podcast. We are back for another round of MotoGP, and this week we are in Austria. Joining me this week is Pete McLaren, of course, regular on this podcast, me, Jordan Morland, and we've got a new face and a new voice as well. Rob is off working for our other company, Visor Down, and enjoying himself riding, testing motorbikes, living the life of it. And joining us is Lewis Duncan. Lewis, a familiar face from the paddock, and yeah, happy to have you on board, mate.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, it's been nice. It's been with Crash the past week, and it's been nice, sort of, working with you guys. Also, I've known Pete for ages. Pete was actually the first person I ever spoke to in the MotoGP paddock, 2015. So it's been almost 10 years. So yeah, it's nice to actually finally kind of work together, and obviously, followed this podcast for a long time as well. So really happy to be part of it.
Good stuff. I don't know if the first person you spoke to in the paddock being Pete was a good or a bad thing.
I was going to
say. I still came back, so it couldn't.
Yeah, you're still here.
Pete, how was the week off? Did you think of anything leading to Austria? Any sort of thoughts come to your mind about this circuit? It's an interesting one, especially. It's a different dynamic now, isn't it, with the change of the circuit, with the chicane at the first sector?
Yeah, I mean, for me, you think Austria, you think Ducati, don't you? And as you say, we're changing the track, taking out that fast corner. It's just added another braking zone, doesn't it? Which is another area where the Ducatis are strong. So, if anything, it sort of seems to play into their hands, maybe even a little bit more than before. But yeah, exactly. Which Ducati will be on top is another matter. But I think, the others have got their hands full to try and end this winning run that Ducati are on at the moment.
Yeah, we'll come on to the Austrian Grand Prix preview in a bit, but I want to focus on the rider market now. We're pretty much nailed on for all the main seats in MotoGP, but the satellite teams are the interesting one at the minute, Lewis. We've got Ai Ogura, who seems pretty nailed on to be a trackhouse next year alongside Raul Fernandez. But there's interesting reports saying that Somkiat Chantra is going to be the one to replace Taka Nakagami at LCR Honda in that Idemitsu seat. What's your thoughts on that? Nakagami, he's been in MotoGP since 2018. He's been a real, like you say, he's been a familiar face there. He's never got that podium, but Honda seemed to trust him and his feedback. But this would seem to be a shift towards the Thai market. Would that be fair to say? They want to get someone from that region there in the MotoGP. It'd be pretty big deal as well, wouldn't it?
Oh yeah, 100%. I think the first time, if I remember rightly, when MotoGP went there for the first test, there was like 30,000 people turned up, which is insane for a pre-season test. But it's always been a big market, and the race is always really well attended. And Chantra obviously has had quite a lot of success there, and it's really gotten that place buzzing. I think it's kind of an interesting one, Chantra and LCR, because when we kind of heard that Ai Ogura was likely nailed on for Trackhouse, we thought, okay, well, that's Nakagami, that's safe. So this is an interesting kind of departure. I mean, from the one hand, it's good to get the Thai market represented. It'll be, I don't think Chantra can do any worse than Nakagami. The bite's been difficult, but as you say, Nakagami's kind of never really kicked on. He's been solid the past couple of years. Really difficult time for Honda, and really helped with the development, and he deserves a lot of credit for that, and arguably deserves maybe another year just because of that. But yeah, you can understand why Honda would be interested to try someone new, but is bringing Chantra into that situation really gonna be good for him? It's really a double-edged sword, this one.
Yeah, and Pete, what's your take on it? Because for so many years, especially for the past two, people just thought Ogura would be the one you'd put straight in there. Obviously, the Honda links, it just made sense. But Ogura, I think, has looked at it and went, I want to be on something competitive, and I think he's proven that, and especially his last few years in Moto2, that he's a rider that deserves a good ride, and I don't think he was willing to put his eggs in the Honda's basket. And they've just kind of thought, well, I will just kind of come with us. But it seems that the change, maybe for Chantra, is a good thing. Like Lewis mentioned, the market's huge. And like to say, that first time we ever went to Thailand, like I said, the tests were packed out. And the first Grand Prix and Grand Prix after have been so successful. It makes sense, doesn't it, to give Chantra a chance?
Yeah. As you say, I think we were all looking at Ogura, weren't we, in LCR? But I suppose Ogura leaving Honda Team Asia, wasn't it? Maybe that was the first sign that he's not just going to follow that pathway of staying with the Honda team and everything that maybe we thought. So maybe that was the first sign that maybe he won't go to a Honda team. And obviously, if you look at the bikes on paper, if you've got a choice of an Aprilia or a Honda at the moment, you know which one you go for, don't you? And yeah, Chantra, as you say, massive market, obviously in Southeast Asia, Thailand. Chantra and Ogura, are they still housemates? I think they might be, right? Do they still live together? Or
I don't know.
Anyway, they're
know.
close, aren't they? I mean, but that would be a great dynamic, wouldn't it? Next year, if they are still living together in Europe, I think Barcelona, if they are two rookies, two different teams, that would be a great story anyway. But Chantra, he's won some races, hasn't he? I guess everything Lewis has said there, and you got the time market behind you. He was a Honda, I think, Asia Talent Cup winner, wasn't he? And I think there's also some people say maybe having somebody, a past champion of that championship, getting to MotoGP, that would also be good. There's been lots of Red Bull Rookies champions, EV champions, all these other things. So that would be another slightly different angle there. I think we're waiting to see, aren't we? And then, for the paperwork to be done, I suppose. But then, as you guys say, Taka Nakagami, it's... I think we were thinking, well, Ogura's going somewhere else. Probably he's safe, but then Aleix is coming in as a test rider as well. So he's not just maybe losing the race seat. It's where would he go? We've always sort of assumed he'd be the obvious guy to go into that testing role, haven't we? Because he can obviously speak to the Japanese engineers in their native language and everything else. So with Aleix coming in on the testing role, it's if they don't keep Nakagami, what will he actually do next year?
Yeah, Lewis. Yeah,
and just to add to that, I mean, you make a good point about Nakagami being able to speak to the Japanese engineers, but we're in this kind of phase where the Japanese manufacturers are trying to kind of make themselves a bit more European. And I mean, I don't know if Chantra can speak Japanese, but I mean, maybe them bringing him in is kind of another sign of that they're willing to step away from that kind of. That mentality that's really held them back for the past few years now. It's really gotten them into this rut that they found themselves in. So I guess maybe from that point, it's in a small sense, Honda going, look, we are willing to adapt. And, for all we know, Chantra could be really good. He could get on a bike, it suits him. Obviously, with it being an Idemitsu-backed project, there is that sort of element of job security. So in theory, he shouldn't be kind of being thrown to the wolves that, But then again, that was the same for Ogura, but you've got to respect the fact that Ogura's really kept Honda hanging on that one. They've wanted to promote him for a few years, and he's been like, no, I'm okay. And now going to Trackhouse on an Aprilia, that's... Yeah, I think that might kind of be seen as a bit of a wound to Honda, because it's like they've had this prodigy, and he's gone, I'm not interested in you. And maybe that's brought about a little bit of soul-searching as well.
Yeah, it's interesting with Ai Ogura, and interestingly enough, I actually interviewed Ai at Silverstone, and it's coming out today on the Christ.net. It's a really interesting chat I had with him, and I kind of poked him about the Honda relationship, and they still back him when he's at MT helmets. It's still on his leathers and stuff, but he was kind of hinting that maybe the project isn't where he thought it would be, and he basically was trying to avoid the question of, are you going to be a Trackhouse next year? And he was just like, well, I've got two options if I go up. And I was like, well, I know where they're going to be then. But he wouldn't give me an answer. But it's interesting that you both mentioned as well about the Asia Talent Cup and Chantra being a former champion and Ogura also coming through there too. That's a big sign for that series. If they get two riders that have came from there, and they'd be the first two in MotoGP to make it, that's a massive thing, isn't it, Pete, for Dorna and these feeder series to have the Asian market like that, really make a presence in MotoGP, because it's only been Nakagami and you could say that Hafiz Siren and stuff have been there, but having them both coming as rookies would be pretty special, wouldn't it?
It would, yeah. It'd be a great boost for that market, wouldn't it? Yeah, and MotoGP at the moment, there's a lot of Italians, there's a lot of Spanish, obviously, isn't there? And we're hearing things like Jack Miller's looking for a ride and all that. That might potentially be Australia out next year. So having Thailand come in, that would be we want more variety, don't we? We want as many countries in the world represented as possible. So that would be I think it'd be good for MotoGP.
Yeah, and I think Dorna's long kind of faced a lot of these accusations of, oh, your passport, if you're Spanish or Italian, it's a guaranteed win, blah, blah, blah. And it's, it is good to see them just proving that isn't the case. And you mentioned Miller. I mean, there's been sort of rumours and reports that actually Dorna's really keen to keep an Australian in the paddock, and now maybe Pramac, Yamaha might be looking a bit more likely for Jack now. So it is good, and there is a little bit of spread there with South Africa represented and stuff like that. You can't blame the Spanish for having so many representatives. They've just it's the system works. People like to complain about it, but they've put the resources into it, they put the backing into it, they've put the support system there. Dorna, doing a bit more to get Asian talent into MotoGP, to make sure we've got Australia represented. I'm sure they would have loved an American on the grid, but you can maybe understand why they've gone, we want a competitive Japanese rider over maybe an American rider who might not hasn't shown the same level of performance as Ogura this year, and Joe Roberts, he's done great, but it's not been the same as Ogura.
And I would just say, if you're picked by Davide Brivio, I mean that's a big star on your CV, isn't it? When you look at the other guys, Maverick Vinales, Rins, all those guys as well, that he's brought in the past. Brivio's a guy who can spot talent, isn't he? And if he says we think Ogura is our guy, then you can understand why Trackhouse are going, okay, let's get him.
Yeah, I think that's a real sign as well. Like you say, Peter, when Davide Brivio comes knocking, it's like, well, he must obviously see something pretty special there in Ai Ogura. And I actually just want to come back to Lewis's point about Jack Miller, Pete. If you're a younger Moto2 rider, and there's been many reports saying that the second seat at Pramac, obviously not confirmed yet, but Miguel Oliveira looks like he's going to get the other one at the Pramac Yamaha side. And if they were maybe considering a younger Moto2 talent, Garcia, Lopez, down that avenue. But if Miller gets that seat, how would you feel if you're a Moto2 rider? Because you're proving that you can win Grand Prix and you feel like you can make the move. It's kind of, there's not really enough seats at the minute, is there, for all these talents?
Well, no, that's the main problem, isn't it? Yeah, we really need those two former Suzuki grid places filled by somebody, don't we? Because there are lots of talents out there that need rides, and as we were saying, more people on the grid, the better, really. For us guys watching, anyway. I mean, you always want to see the Moto2 champion, I think, move up. As long as that's what they want to do, and obviously in most cases that's their ambition, their goal. So, I mean, Ogura's obviously up there fighting for it. But yeah, you would understand why if you win the Moto2 championship and the doors don't open, and you'd feel a little bit frustrated. But that's just the issue at the moment, is that there's not enough seats. There's a lot of talented riders. As Lewis was saying, Miller is Dorna. You can understand why they would want to keep him as much as they can. I mean, they can't force anyone to have any particular riders, can they? But yeah, Miller, for us guys in the media, and Lewis will know this from speaking to him as well. We all like those sort of personalities. It's not just about what you do when you sit on the bike, is it, being a MotoGP rider? There's much more to it, and there's guys that can explain the sport, guys that can bring in much more other angles to it, to the whole entertainment factor, if you like. And Jack is one of those guys, and he's still fast, as I'm sure he'll point at. And as he was saying at Silverstone, look, he doesn't want to get a ride because of his passport, because of his personality. He wants to get it because he believes he's still got the speed. And yeah, let's see what he can do. I think we were all Jack was sort of alluding to it, that maybe a few results could change things, couldn't it? And coming to Pramac, of course, they love him, don't they? He raced for them at Ducati, and there were some rumours, weren't there, Lewis? You'll remember this, about maybe Lorenzo coming in, weren't there? Do you remember? And Pramac, it seemed, kind of sided with Jack and went, no, we want Jack. We don't want Lorenzo to come in and kind of take over from Jack. So they've shown in the past that they're very loyal to Jack, and yeah, if he could get that right, I think it'd be good for him. Good experience for Yamaha as well, coming into that project with Jack's experience of all these other bikes. So let's see if it happens.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, it was this time about 5 years ago, that was the case. It was Austria Grand Prix, everyone was waiting, and then that was a strange one. And then they gave him the factory ride. You kind of feel it's sort of like, okay, we pulled you through the mud a little bit, so here's your factory ride. But yeah, I think the passport thing is always going to be a factor, but if it's being used in a positive way of, like, we just need to keep representation up, then that's good. And it's not a case of, like, Miller isn't being kind of afforded an opportunity to possibly stay because, like you say, because he's Australian. The results haven't been there this year, but there is at least a track record of he's a proven race winner. On a good day, he's fighting for the podium. He's like a solid sort of top 10 guy, and that should kind of be the level we're looking at for riders. There's been a few on the grids for a few years who haven't really kind of done that either, and have protected the rides for a lot longer. It would be good to see a bit more of a spread, but obviously there's only so much you could do if a team wants to sign, someone like Garcia, for example, who looks like Sergio Garcia is going to be the big loser of kind of the whole rider market shuffle. Then that's their prerogative, but it's a shame Garcia is going to lose out. But the fact that someone like Ogura will get a shot, then that's the system works.
Yeah,
in part.
It does, yeah. But like I say, it's just like you'd love to have. It'd be so. How could it be if Ogura wins the championship in Moto2, great, you get the champion in. But then if Garcia loses out by winning the title in Moto2 and has to stay for another year, it's like it's only been like one before it's done. That was Tito Rabat, I think, back in.
Zarco as well.
Zarco as well, yeah. So like, it's like you just expect that jump to happen to MotoGP, but who knows? Things can change quickly in MotoGP, and we could be completely wrong. We could have this completely wrong, but yeah, like I say, the first two, Ogura and Chantra, seem pretty nailed on. The Pramac situation, whispers of Miller getting that seat, but who knows? It could change. Right, on to the Austrian Grand Prix preview. Now, it's a circuit that for the past 2 years, I'd say the racing's been pretty, not boring, but when someone gets the lead, like Bagnaia, he's just dominated. And are we going to get the same this week, Pete? Bagnaia's looking to bounce back after, I'd say, a pretty, it was not a tough Silverstone, but he had to salvage something, and he did in the Grand Prix by getting third place. He had to really fight for it in the end by, his tyre was dropping off and clinging onto that podium, but looking to make it 3 in a row at Austria. And like I say, it's a fantastic circuit for Ducati. It always has been. Can he expect Martin or Bastianini to really take it to him this week? It's a real, if the form goes off it, he is just going to continue the way he usually is around here.
Yeah, it seems like sort of Bagnaia and Martin, you can bet on them being up there, can't you, really? And as you rightly mentioned, Bastianini for me is probably the biggest question mark. Can he sort of continue this run? It's different tyres, aren't there, in Austria because of the nature of the track. They run that sort of reinforced construction on the rear, which sort of does change things a little bit, doesn't it? Maybe that plays into Ducati's hands. That's why the rear grip, why they're so good around there. But what will that mean? Will it be a tyre race? Will the tyre degradation come into it? In which case, at the moment, all your money's on Bastianini if he can. When it comes to those situations. But on the other hand, if tyre degradation is not so much of an issue, then maybe he won't have such a good time. And not a great pass record. We were discussing it earlier, weren't we? I think, but for Bastianini, that is at this track. But he has been fast in the past. But I think overhauling Bagnaia, stopping that 3 in a row, that's going to be a tough task.
Yeah, Lewis, what's your take on this weekend? Is it going to be just a Pecco sort of dominated weekend like we've seen in Assen, or can we see Martin just take it to him, squeeze him a little bit more? Because the championship lead is Martin's, but it's nothing at the minute. But what's your thoughts on this weekend?
Yeah, it's I think before the summer break I would have been like 100% Pecco's going to walk this weekend, but I kind of thought that was going to be the case at Silverstone, and we didn't have that. And I went on another podcast a few weeks ago and made quite a leery prediction that after Germany I thought Martin's title challenge would maybe start to stutter a little bit, and it hasn't. So it's the two of them, the kind of the consistency thing is really hard to predict. On paper the circuit characteristics really do play into Bagnaia's hands. Lots of hard braking and getting the bike out the corners. In theory, that should suit Bastianini as well, but as you say, the form guide's a bit harder to predict for him. If the qualifying thing from Silverstone for Bastianini does carry on, if that's legitimate, then I think Bastianini's in a much, much stronger place. Martin obviously won for the first time here in Austria, so he's got form around here as well. But last year was a bit scrappy. He had that turn one pile up in the sprint. There was, and Pecco was perfect. So it really is finely poised, and I think you guys discussed it on the podcast last week that's kind of a nightmare for Ducati in terms of this championship situation with two guys going to be leaving at the end of the year, and they really kind of just need Pecco to just put in a couple of weekends of real solid dominance to kind of remove that headache a little bit, because the more Bastianini is competitive, the less they can utilise him as a tail gunner.
Yeah, that is a good point, isn't it? Because say Enea comes in here, qualifies front row, and then he say wins the sprint, and like Ducati are going to be going, hang on, where did this come from all of a sudden? Since he's kind of lost his seat, he's kind of just had this incredible. He's always had great race late pace, and he's always delivered that way. But what he done at Silverstone was like, people were really surprised by how calm and how everything looked, and he just. If he can do it this weekend, Bastianini, what did Ducati say? They can't say anything, really, can they?
Difficult for them, isn't it? Yeah, if he gets a sniff of the championship and he knows he's off next year, I mean, as you say, what could you say to him? This is sort of the Bastianini that I think we expected a year ago, wasn't it? But it was just a nightmare with the injuries, wasn't it? And the GP23 not really suiting his style and everything else. I know he got that one win at Sepang, but otherwise there wasn't really much to sort of remember from last year for him. So it's almost like if you take last year out, this is kind of what we expected when he moved to the factory Ducati team. And it's just, a bit ironic that he's now delivering it after he's sort of been overlooked and heading off to another factory for next year. So, I mean, maybe that's also a factor. Maybe in his mind, he doesn't know how competitive the KTM is going to be next year. He knows the bike he's on right now is very competitive, and he's got half a season to just make the most of it, isn't he? And just go for it. What is it, 46 points or something? But
49, I think. 49,
sorry, to Bagnaia. Sorry. As far as his teammate. But you're right there. And what, 37 for a weekend now? So, I think you're right. If he delivers this weekend, I think he's firmly in the title chase. I think there's no doubt about that.
Yeah, Lewis, I'd be always interested to see what would happen if Bagnaia and Bastianini had a bit of an incident with each other. Like, how does that even come into, like, what did Ducati do then? Because they have to worry about Jorge Martin still, who'd be sitting rubbing his hands at the prospect of the two factory bikes coming together.
Well, exactly. I made the point last week in a column that really at Silverstone, Ducati should have told Bagnaia to move out of the way for Bastianini, a bit earlier, because at this stage of the season, if Bastianini's got the pace to beat Martin, it benefits them more in this kind of bigger picture of, not really wanting Martin to win the championship to go to Aprilia's number one. But the longer this goes on, and we know that from 2022 that Bastianini isn't really one for kind of playing the company line, really, because Ducati never issued any orders as such, but there was this instruction of if it's for a race win, fine, but like if it's a podium, leave Bagnaia to it. And Bastianini didn't really get that memo. You remember races like Malaysia, for example, where she was, I remember watching that with hands over my eyes, because you could just sort of see a situation where it was all going to go wrong. So Bastianini does have that quality to him, where he is willing to have a fight, and he's really willing to put Pecco up against it if he gets the opportunity. So I mean, that isn't something I kind of thought about coming into it, but there is an interesting kind of factor if the two of them do have a collision. Martin is the one to benefit the most from that. And, Marc Marquez as well, I guess, is
exactly
the other one there.
Yeah, I was going to come on to Marc Marquez, because he kind of been forgotten in all this GP24 sweep of Silverstone, and it's like, well, Marquez is it like 62 points? He's off the championship lead. I think that's right, and he's, as we talked about before, for the summer break and after, he kind of mentioned that keeping third place was his priority, and we were surprised that he wasn't looking forward more. But obviously it's to do with the GP23, the 24 is clearly a step ahead. But for Marquez, this is a circuit where on the Honda, he had such great results on it. He was just beaten by Dovizioso a couple of times, Lorenzo, and it's a stop and go circuit, and with that added chicane too, Marquez, it really suits his style. He's on the bike that won around here last year. Obviously, the jump of the 24 is a massive thing still, because he mentioned 4 to 5 seconds a race, really, 2 to 3 attempts a lap. When you look at it overall, you're losing. That's what the average kind of is. Marquez can have a good weekend here, but he needs to win, really, if he wants to have any chance of getting into this title fight, because the door's kind of closing now, isn't it?
It's slipping away a bit, isn't it? Yeah, but as you say, interesting to see what he can do on a Ducati. I guess this is one of the tracks where he hasn't won, isn't it? There's not many of them that he's raced on for all of these years. What's it, 2016 it joined the calendar, and not had a win. So yeah, interesting to see now he's on the best bike around there, what he can do. And we know he's strong in braking, as you say, so that's going to help him. But yeah, the 24s have something in acceleration, don't they? That factory ride height device, the engine power, whatever it is, all those things combined probably. They certainly seem to punch out the corners a bit better. So yeah, where will he be? Let's see. And I think, as you boys have been saying, the interesting thing is with all these bikes up there, the points can swing more than usual. You know, in the past, we always used to have just two riders fighting for the championship, didn't we? So they'd chip 5 points off each other here and there. Whereas now you get races like at Silverstone where you can be first and you can be fourth, and there's not much in it. So we can see big changes with Marc up there with Bastianini. It can, big points gaps can be sort of fairly quickly eaten up. So yeah, interesting to see what Marc can do. I think he's got to pick his battles a bit, to be honest. Yep. I think there's going to be some tracks where he does have a chance to win and he's just got to go for it and not think about the championship, because that's in a way his best asset at the moment, isn't it? The fact that the other guys maybe do have to have one mind on, don't make a mistake, don't fall down. He doesn't need to do that, I think. I think he's in a position now. He knows he's got the factory contract for next year. Next year is the time to think about the championship. Now's the time to just, if he's got a chance, go for it, I think.
Lewis, it's a good point, isn't it? Because Marquez essentially just needs a clean weekend. He hasn't really had one this year where it's all went to plan. Austria, it could be that weekend for him, but like Pete says, he needs to pick his battles, doesn't he, and try and strike when he needs to, because this weekend we're just assuming that it's going to be the 24s up there.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm kind of thinking more towards Aragon will be the weekend for Marc. Left-handed circuit, not been there for a while. He's always been really good. But yeah, the GP24 thing is interesting. Gigi Dall'Igna has made some comments recently about the GP23 and has said that, what we can do to that bike, we will, which I kind of took as a sort of thinly veiled kind of, if we can give Marc a bit of help to sort of back up Pecco and, make life difficult for the other guys, we will. And if I don't know how, if they can maybe, retroactively fit this sort of factory ride height device to the GP23, but I wouldn't be surprised if we maybe turn up in Austria and Marc's maybe got this part on the bike. I think I don't see him not being competitive this weekend if he can get the ball rolling from Friday, and that's kind of been the problem this year, that he's openly admitted to, that the phrase he used at Silverstone was that they've always been in delay, because yes, he's been on the bike now for half a year, but there's no data for him, for the team, for him, is to kind of back off, well, what did we do last year? You've got, Digi's data from last year on a GP22. They've obviously got the factory boys from last year, but it's one thing to look at some lines on a bit of paper. It's another thing to actually put that on track. And, I think people like to give Marc and the team quite a hard time, but if you look at like where he was on Friday at Silverstone to where he ended up on Sunday, and that has been the case at a lot of rounds where they've been, in Q1 sometimes, and he still come through to the podium. You've got to give that Marquez, Frankie Carcetti, duo a real lot of credit. So, yeah, well, Austria, in theory, a bit of a simpler track, so there shouldn't be too much for them to kind of, to get lost with. So, yeah, Marc's always the most interesting guy whatever race weekend, but especially this season, just with, is this going to be the weekend? Is this going to be the weekend? Let's see. It could be. I think the GP24s will have an edge, but yeah, let's see.
Yeah, and who knows what the weather might do. That could be a thing as well, because Marquez has a really good wet setup. I think every time there's been a wet session, there's not been many this year. I mean, he's been right at the front, obviously got the pole position in Jerez in the wet too. So, yeah, and even led that weird wet Qatar session too. So, Marquez, if there's any iffy weather this weekend, could play into his hands, and it makes it a bit more of a level playing field. Before we go on to the other manufacturers, I want to talk about Fabio Di Giannantonio, Pete. Officially confirmed, staying with VR46 for 2 more years, but he is a factory-backed rider now for Ducati, getting latest spec machinery. Well deserved, isn't it? It's a really good story as well. Losing his seat last year, was going to be out of MotoGP, turns it around last year, gets a 4th place, I think, was it in Mandalika, I think it was. It really changed everything. And then got his first podium at Phillip Island, then took that sensational win in Qatar, and then kept his ride. Obviously, we've got to see that VR46 and has really been the closest GP23 to Marc Marquez, and this is his reward for the hard work, really.
It is, yeah. It's been a fairy tale year, really, hasn't it? If you look at where he was this time last year, I think most people wouldn't have expected him to even be in MotoGP, let alone on the factory spec version of the best bike on the grid. Yeah, basically takes over the Pramac sort of situation, doesn't he? The factory bike in a satellite team. The only guy, won't he be the only guy in a satellite Ducati team on the latest bike? So that they'll only have 3 of them. That puts them below on numbers compared to the KTM's, the Yamahas, the Aprilias, who we assume will have all 4 of their riders on the latest bike. So that's slightly interesting. Bagnaia sort of made clear he'd prefer to have 4 riders on exactly the same factory bike just for the data reasons and things like that. But there we go. There's only going to be 3, and yeah, Digi has been the chosen guy. So yeah, a bit of an example is, the guys that don't have a seat in MotoGP and maybe think it's all over. Well, just look over at Digia, because if you want to see how someone could turn things around and end up in a much better situation. I mean, even VR46 were kind of pretty cool about wanting him, weren't they? When it was sort of initially on offer, they were kind of, well, he's a great rider, but... And as you say, then he gets the win in Qatar, and it always got to the point where it was just they just couldn't not sign him, if that makes sense. You had to go with him, and he's proven that was a good decision. It's the stability of staying in the team, it's a 2-year deal, isn't it? I think as well. So he knows he's got a 2-year deal, a bit of stability there, and it'll be great to see what he can do with that bike.
Yeah, Lewis is quite crazy. He's became like the team leader at VR46 now, and it's like the way he's just matured over space of a year. It's really like your article you wrote last week about young riders should be looking at him as the example of, this is why you shouldn't really get rid of them so early, because they can have that bounce back when there's a bit of pressure needed, and he's delivered massively on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all kind of expected Digia to go to VR46 and really just be a seat warmer. It was almost kind of a mercy thing from VR46 with Ducati going, he's won a race, you've not got a rider, do us a favour.
Yeah.
And going up against Bezzecchi, championship challenger last year, 3 wins. We kind of just expected Digia to just kind of quietly be sort of left in his wake, and it just hasn't been the case. And it is a good point about riders sort of showing that there is no avenues are closed if you kind of keep working hard. And Digia has worked hard. I spoke to Frankie Carcetti in Valencia last year about it, and he was like, when I started working with him, his setup was so far off, where the other Ducati riders were, and really it was about the first season nobody was really helping him kind of extract his main strong point, which is kind of corner exit, while being a bit closer in terms of braking and stuff. And now he's really he's figured that out. He's gone to stepped up on to a better bike and has really performed. You look at the kind of the breakdown of points per round between the two of them, and Digia this season's on pace for 10.4 per round, whereas Bez is only 6.1. Which, and we know obviously all the problems Bezzecchi's had, but like that is a really big thing for Digia to just be at that kind of consistency. And yeah, I hope this does serve as something for teams and manufacturers to look at young riders and go, okay, 2 years. Well, it's not 2 years really now. It's a year. You've kind of really got a year in this contract cycle, and then if you're not good enough, you're out. I think Augusto Fernandez is kind of a real statement of that, where he was like, okay, got afforded a second year, but everyone really kind of knew it was not going to be a long-term thing. They were either going to keep the stable that they had, or they were going to bring someone in. Teams need to give these young riders time. We've lost too many young riders who had potential to just being forced through the system and then being like, oh, you weren't good enough, bye. Not everyone's going to be Pedro Acosta, not everyone's going to be Marc Marquez, not everyone's going to be Fabio Quartararo. Just give them time. 2-3 years is not, they need more time, and I hope Digia really stands as the example of that.
Yeah, I think it's a brilliant story, and I think it's one that needs to be highlighted more. I think it's just it helps with the fact he's a really nice guy as well, and that's the thing. He speaks to the media so politely. You can just tell he loves what he does, and for someone to be rewarded like this, it's really good, isn't it, Pete? And it serves as a thing as well that he said last week at Silverstone that he has the power to change. He had the power to change his future, and he did do it. He was the one that could control it. and it's really refreshing to hear that something good came from it.
Yeah, that's it. He believed in himself. Lewis has highlighted Frankie Carcetti. We should say he came in for the second year, didn't we?
Yeah.
There was a different crew chief, and that partnership really is just sort of just laid the foundation for everything that Digi's gone on to do. And yeah, he's just growing and growing, isn't he? Let's see where he ends up in the next few years. Maybe including at Suzuka alongside Bagnaia. It seems it might be the case, right? And he seems open to that as well. So yeah, it's good to see someone that works hard, has the talent, getting somewhere and getting the reward for it, because it was looking pretty bleak, wasn't it? Lewis will remember this time last year, every race weekend was pretty much, what are you going to do next year, because the assumption was you won't be here, sort of thing. And he's really turned that around, and good on him. Let's see what he does. As you say, there's guys like Augusto Fernandez, where will he end up next year? Sort of rumours of maybe a test riding deal or something like that. But yeah, it's you just want to see guys. You want to see everyone get the chance to show their potential, don't you? That's all you can really ask. Not everyone can be a champion. Not everyone can be even a MotoGP race winner. But you just hope that everyone that puts in that dedication and work gets the chance to show what they're capable of at some stage in their careers. And working out for Digi.
You look at a guy like Dovi, for example. I think Dovi's a real perfect case of that. Of like, okay, he was great in 250s, 125s. MotoGP were quick to begin with, but it was years before we saw Dovi really kind of develop into the rider that we thought he was going to be in the first place. It took someone like Cal a good few years before he was really, challenging kind of right at the front, and even longer before he was winning races. There are a lot of examples of riders who were given time and blossomed because of that. Like, it's not going to be an overnight thing. I think just picking up on your point there, Pete, I mean, I think a lot of credit has to go to the VR46 team. Like you say, they were not kind of hot on him being there in the first place, but they've accepted him as their own. They've given him that same structure of help and support, and he's really taken it on board. He's not fully assimilated himself into it because, as you said before, he wants to kind of keep some of his training a bit separate, which is fair enough because he's not an academy rider. And I guess kind of going into that situation would be a little bit daunting of, there's a lot of existing friendships and relationships. But VR46 deserves a lot of credit for how they've helped him grow this year. And they're really going to benefit from that next year and beyond, with the factory bike, with all those sort of things. So VR46, I think we've always thought it as a Rossi project. It's always going to be for Rossi riders. They've taken on an outsider, let's say, and they've made him one of their own. And I think that deserves a lot of credit, because a lot of teams wouldn't do that. They'd take a rider and just be like, oh, whatever, batting in. Oh, it's not been good enough. We told you. See ya. Not them.
Not them, exactly, and it's paid off massively for them. And I think, Dijon Antonio will be, I think he's just going to keep growing and growing. The more support he gets, which he's going to get the next 2 years from Ducati, completely be on the same spec machinery as the two factory boys. Right, KTM now. This is always a difficult one, Pete, with KTM. It's like I say, they're the only manufacturer other than Ducati that's won around the Red Bull Ring, and can they do anything this weekend? It seems that the same issue, that rear vibration chatter is a problem for them. And, Pedro Acosta goes into real detail about it, but he says that Jack Miller's struggling with it way more than him because of weight and height, and it's all to do with how Acosta could use it to kind of play around and just kind of mask the issue. But how are they going to fix this problem, especially at a circuit like Austria, where, it's going to be tough for them, isn't it?
The pressure's going to be on, isn't it? Yeah, home event, all that expectation, all the bosses will be there. I think they've done a private test or two, haven't they, with Paul, maybe Danny as well. So at least they'll have a bit of data, that kind of thing. You've got to believe they'll have some new parts, won't they? They've got to have something to try and catch up. It seemed like the riders generally were kind of, we need to develop, we need to move on. We've almost got to the limit of what the bike can do at the moment. KTM seem to be backing their riders that it's the bike that needs to make a step, not those guys. The slower corners should suit the bike more, I guess. It's sort of naturally, it's the KTM thing, isn't it? The hard braking, the slow corners. So that in itself should help them a bit. So yeah, I would expect them to be up there, because we've seen Aprilia really take the fight to Ducati, haven't we, in recent rounds. I think KTM could be the manufacturer that's sort of next best, but how close they'll be, I really don't know. It would be a big bet to. I know Binder was second in both races, wasn't he, last year for KTM?
Yeah.
But quite, as you said previously, a distant second, wasn't it? Certainly on the Sunday. So, yeah, it would need a huge step to be up there fighting with for the victory, I think, this weekend.
And Lewis, it's obviously home race KTM. A lot of Austrian bosses and stuff are going to be there. It's it's crunch time, isn't it, for KTM?
Yeah, you have to wonder how much the stiffer kind of rear tire might just help a little bit, and maybe removing some of those vibration issues, because we think they sort of stem from the fact that the 2024 tires just offer so much grip. So you have to think that might play into the fact. You look at like races where that was, there as well, like Thailand last year. Brad was quite quick, and I think the KTMs were pretty solid in Indonesia as well, if I remember rightly. So there is kind of previous with that harder construction that suits the KTM. But if this is just going to kind of be a one-off sort of thing, then like it's that. I don't think we'll be able to read anything into it, and that's kind of been the problem for KTM for too long now, as they've had flashes of speed and it's not been consistent. Certainly not in the same way that Aprilia has been. Okay, recently Aprilia have taken a bit of a step back, but yeah, I mean it is kind of crunch time. It's going to be someone like Brad and Pedro. If the bike is in a reasonable window to be competitive, it's not happened often this year, so they're going to have to go for it. But whether they can fight against the Ducatis, I don't know. Like Pete says, they've had a bit of testing data, but yeah, that's all irrelevant if they don't bring any meaningful updates.
Yeah, that's it. And speaking of challenging Ducati, Aprilia kind of fall into this second place battle, you could call it. But they look good in Silverstone, Pete, but they just not disappointed. I think it's more the fact that we only get really one of them up there at the time. It's like if it was just a few more of you up there, it'd be a bit more. You kind of be a bit more of an understanding. Okay, this is what works for the Aprilias, but it's always either Espargaro or Viñales, or then you get flashes from Oliveira and then Fernandez. It's like, well, can KTM kind of they all kind of struggle with the same issue, but then there's always one Aprilia rider who kind of has a standout compared to the rest. So it's like, where do they kind of fall into this weekend? A circuit that, in theory, it should suit their bike. It's just whether they're going to have a more consistent weekend, all four of their riders.
I think that's been the frustration, isn't it? Is that they get a good result and they think, okay, we've got something to build on here. They go to the next round and someone else is ahead of them on the same bike, and then it all changes again. So I think that's part of the frustration at Aprilia is what you mentioned there, Jordan, is that they're not able to build that consistency and keep sort of stepping forward. They have a good weekend. Oliveira, of course, if we take that example, suddenly bang, he's up there at Sachsenring, and then Silverstone comes along. He had a good race there last year, but this year it just didn't happen, did it again? And so they're always sort of playing catch up a bit. I think Austria, it never used to be a good track for Aprilia because it was so good, the Aprilia on the corner speed, wasn't it? And there weren't really that many fast corners. Was it Maverick about 6th place last year or something like that? They have worked on that for this year. They've worked on the braking to try and make the bike better over the whole season in the hard braking zone. So it'll be interesting to see if they can make a step in that area, because certainly hard braking is what you need in Austria, isn't it? So but it's a difficult one. I mean, as I say, I think for me the best case would be to be again the best non-Ducati, and that would be fending off the KTMs and everything else. I think that's the best you can expect if you're Aprilia this weekend. I'd be shocked if they're up there. Certainly on the Sunday, we've seen the sprints are closer. For whatever reason, the Ducatis don't seem as strong, or to have such an advantage in the sprints. Is it soft rear tyre? Who knows? But come Sunday, we're not just seeing all Ducati podiums, are we? We're seeing top 4s, top 5s, and beyond. So it would. For me, I think Aprilia again, a top 6 would be a decent weekend. But the question is, as you've said there, which one of them will it be?
That's my question to you, Lewis. Who do you think it will be? It's hard to say, isn't it? Because it's just like, please, just can both the factory bikes be up there? But it's like it's always one has some issue and then one's at the top of it, and you're like, well, I just can't read into this. Yeah,
it's tricky. I mean, you'd like to think this would be kind of maybe a better weekend for Miguel. It's typically been an all right circuit for him. Of course, he won the Grand Prix here a few years ago. It's tricky. I mean, Aprilia has obviously been suffering quite a lot from quite high tyre wear in the long distance races. And, and it shouldn't be as big a problem this weekend in theory, but, that bike's strength is long, flowing, fast corners, not really the kind of stop-start sort of thing. So, yeah, I think it really is. It's probably going to be a weekend where Aprilia just needs to survive it. I think, I'd like to see Maverick do a bit more because he just has not been really very good at all over the past few rounds. Miguel's showing flashes of speed, Raul's showing flashes of speed, but it's quite hard to sort of kind of predict where he's going to be because he's now learning this 2024 chassis and he didn't really get a race on it last time out. So, Aleix is probably going to be your point man to begin with, but I think Miguel might have a better weekend this weekend and might just take the advantage. But yeah, what Aprilia desperately need is a bit of consistency. But they're also now speaking about maybe having to sacrifice Fridays to try and figure out the tyre issue, which could then mean we're seeing them in Q1. And, it does sound like we're in a phase of them going backwards to going forward now. So yeah, it does seem like a really hard to read time for Aprilia, and it's disappointing given the strong start to the season they had.
Yeah, it is, because like you say, there's no issues when they do a fast lap. They're always up there, and like, it's no surprise when you see Maverick on a Friday who's just blitzing lap times. You're like, well, this is going to be good, and then the Saturday comes and you're like, well, where has it all disappeared? And it obviously didn't help last time out with the Trackhouse boys at Silverstone. Lap 1 they had that incident and wiped each other out, so Raul Fernandez really didn't get any race data for that 24. I'm just puzzled with them half the time. I'm like, I just want something to be like, this is the weekend where it all clicks and we know for them. But I think they'll be okay this weekend. Where they're going to finish, like I say, trying to feed that top non-Ducati is the target, but they're going to have plenty of competition for that, I think, because Pedro Acosta, I think, will ride around his shoes on the KTM. Bender's strong around here. It'll be interesting to see if it goes to that plan, who will be the top one outside of the Ducatis. Lastly, I want to talk about predictions. And Lewis, I know your first time on here. Our predictions are usually hit and miss. Sometimes we get them bang on in the wrong races, so we'll call the sprint winner for the Grand Prix, and then it's like, oh, yeah, we've been okay. But Lewis, who do you think will be the sprint winner for the Austrian Grand Prix weekend? If it's dry, I'm not going to go into this if it's wet business. We'll just hope it's dry.
Well, my predictions are always famously quite rubbish. So yeah, I think sprint. You're kind of Martin. I think is probably where you're at in the sprint. He's generally been very good on Saturdays, and I think a bit of momentum after Silverstone will probably carry him forward a bit.
Pete, sprint predictions?
Yeah, I was going to go for Martin as well, to be honest. Because he's the guy for the sprints, isn't he? He's good at the Red Bull Ring. I think anyone that says other than a Ducati in first place in either races is going to be brave, aren't they, with the predictions? So, yeah, but you know what? I'll say Marc, because maybe he can pull off some magic, and as I say, if he takes that approach of just upping the risk level a bit and maybe letting off the brakes a bit because the other guys can't afford any more DNFs, So yeah, I'll say Marc.
I think I'm going to say Bagnaia. I'm going to be really safe here. Just play that one because I think his records, even last year, he was so good. And it's like, well, if he's in that form and the weekend goes to how it should do for him, no one can get close to him. And I think that leads into the Grand Prix then. Lewis, it's like, well, if he's doing this in the sprint, surely he has to be the favourite. But, Martin, I think, if he gets because I think that was the whole point last year where he had that incident. The qualifying wasn't great for Martin, was it? Is that correct in saying?
Yes, I think he was off the front row.
He was off the front row, and that's where because I forgot to mention that turn 1 is really tight at Austria, and we do see a bit of bumping and barging in the middle of the pack especially, so qualifying will be crucial. So you're going to expect, and I don't want to bring it up with the towing business and how that is, but it will be a really big factor this weekend qualifying, won't it?
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, qualifying at Austria is always really quite tight because it's such a short circuit. A bit longer now with the chicane, but yeah, you do have to think that the towing thing is going to be even more of an issue, and it's going to be even easier for people to get caught out and get penalties. And I think that's, if you're Ducati, you really need to have a word with all of your riders and be like, don't just do not get involved with this. Go and do your lap, and because if you get, like you say, you get swallowed up in the pack, you are in that pinch point for turn one, and it always is chaos there.
Yeah, well, good luck to Ducati trying to tell Marc Marquez not to do anything when he's in Gresini colours. That'll be, that'll be fun. But for the Grand Prix, Lewis, your prediction, who do you think is going to be the winner?
I agree with you on the Pecco front on that one. I think just, based on last year, and if you can, obviously iron out those, kind of make sure there's no mistakes there, which is always a bit of a question mark with Pecco. I think, just past form, he was so good last year, and I can't see that being any different if he just lines up everything properly. Yeah,
Pete, what's your take on the Grand Prix?
Yeah, hard to look beyond Pecco for me at this stage. I mean, as you say, he's going for 3 in a row, isn't he? And we've seen so many races this year, haven't we, where he's continued a run of wins from past events, shall we say? And I really don't see. Well, he's the favourite for this one for me, is again. As I say, Bastianini a question mark though. If he can, as Lewis says, qualify well, make use of this tyre sort of wear thing, if that comes into it, if he can, then who knows? But I think at this stage, pre-weekend, Bagnaia is the guy to beat for sure.
Yeah, he is, and I'm going to make it a hat trick for the Grand Prix. So I think I'll stick with Pecco for the Grand Prix. But I want a really nice battle. We haven't really seen one in the past. I think the last one really was that Oliveira, Espargaro, Miller. Whatever happened to that last corner, that I just think of the commentary and like Steve Day screaming his head off at it, and Matt Burt losing their minds. It's still like the best, and I love Austria for that, because the last corner and that last sector is so good, because you get the overtaking chance with the penultimate corner, and then if you don't get it that one, you can have a go again. And I think it should be named the Dovizioso last corner, name it after him, because some of those moves on Marquez were just outstanding. But I hope we get a nice battle with, I want to say, other manufacturers with the Ducatis. That would be a dream, but I think we're going to see just those GP24s run away with it, and maybe Marc Marquez, and who knows, the Gian Antonio, maybe Alex Marquez, maybe they can hang on outside the top 5, but I think it's going to be tough for every other manufacturer that isn't a Ducati. And any last thoughts, gents? Anything you want to add before we wrap it up?
Not really, only track limits is always something that seems to come up. So, sorry to bring that in at the end, but I just hope that we don't get any more upturned results, shall we say, because it's in the past. It's and of course tyre pressures as well. But let's hope that neither of those play a part this weekend. But Austria is one of those tracks for track limits.
Oh yeah, that's just what we wanted, Pete. Well done. You brought up the track limits and the tire pressures. Tried to avoid it there, and I don't know, Lewis, if you've seen the F1 type of track limit curb they had for the last corner. They had like the gravel in between. Surely that's going to be replaced. You would like to think, wouldn't you?
I would think so. I mean, Austria, they have a habit of kind of putting gravel from MotoGP and taking it away for F1. So you'd like to think it's not there, but. Yeah, the track limits. I mean, and the thing is, well, I can't remember at Austria if we have certain sections where it's not green, because there's this rule that's been introduced this year where it's like, if you run off track limits but it's not green, you're fine, and it's like, just that doesn't make sense.
No, it doesn't. No. I always remember, I think it was a Jorge Martin in Moto2 lost their win there, wasn't it?
Against
Zeki?
Bez, yeah.
And it was like, it was all due to the colour of it, whatever it was. It was like, was even off the track. It was like, well, I just hope we don't get that this weekend, because I had enough of it last year, and I was fed up just being like, who's on the green, who's not in the green here, and it's like sensors going off, and it's like...
Austria's never been a great one for Freddie Spencer as chief race steward, so let's hope it's a clean one.
Yeah, let's hope it is, and we just hope we get maybe a bit of weather to spice it up too. I think, Austria has a habit of having that really localized, crazy showers that they have, and there's always little lingering clouds. And I'll welcome any weather on race day if they can race in it and it's exciting for the show. Bring it on. And we'll be back next week for the review of the Austrian Grand Prix. Let's hope it's a good one. But if you enjoyed listening to this podcast, to find us on Apple, Spotify. Make sure to give us a 5-star review. Helps out massively on the charts. And thank you always for your support. If you're listening or watching on YouTube, comment below. That helps us massively, gets us out there on the YouTube algorithm. Subscribe, it costs nothing, it's totally free. You'll always be notified whenever there's a new podcast or video. And yeah, we'll see you in the next one for another podcast.